Let's talk about this package and what it means. I know you were in favor of this passing. It's here. Now what? What will this mean for the economy the rest of this year and beyond?
Well, look, I think we are looking at 6 to 7% growth for the U.S. economy this year. And stop and think about it. If that's accomplished, it will mean that the U.S. could very well grow more rapidly than the Chinese economy for the first time since 1976. So this is, I think, appropriate to the moment. Exactly. It is of that order of magnitude. And we still have some headwinds. We're still not out of the woods. There are 4 million Americans who have been unemployed for more than 27 weeks, but there is a lot of support coming. And again, I think you see it in CEO confidence boosting. You see it in a variety of indicators suggesting that this year could turn out to be, again, quite strong from an economic growth perspective.
If that's the case, as things really get rolling along and we actually start to see some of this economic growth, you think that there's any way we're going to be staying near the 1.5% that we're sitting at for the 10-year Treasury right now?
I think, look, this comes back to the debate mostly about inflation. We are going to see some upward pressure on inflation for a variety of reasons, some of which are technical. But the big question is it temporary or is it permanent? Put me in the temporary camp. I think there's a whole variety of reasons to believe, including the fact that we don't have recent history of very high inflation, which affects psychology and expectations, to think that we're going to have a temporary blip here in terms of pressure on prices, but that it won't be permanently perpetuated out over time. And that's also because don't think that this is going to go on forever. That 6 to 7% growth is not a permanent feature. It's a temporary thing. As we come back on the other side of that, there will be some downward pressure on pricing too.
I ask because I know the next thing that lots of Democrats are looking to is what happens with an infrastructure bill. Is that something that can get passed? If interest rates remain at 1.5%, maybe it has better odds than if interest rates start to skyrocket, or not even skyrocket. If you get to 2.5%, what does that do to the potential for an infrastructure bill? Could it be as big if you're talking about deficit spending again?
Well, I think one of the central debates that's coming over this infrastructure bill is exactly, does it need to be offset or partially offset? So if we go and spend another $2 or $3 trillion, how much of that should be deficit financed and how much of it should be offset by other spending cuts or tax increases elsewhere in the budget? This is going to become the central debate over the next piece of legislation. And one of the difficulties is there aren't that many offsets. There's certainly not in the $2 to $3 trillion range that could pass the Senate. So the question becomes, how do you reconcile those two objectives? I personally think if it comes down to climate spending, I would, if we don't have the offsets, I'd do it anyway, because my perspective is that the climate risk that we face over the next 5 to 10 years is irreversible. The fiscal risk can be dealt with later if we need to. And I say that because if we go another 5 or so years without seriously altering the path to the energy transition, we are not going to be able, if you get to 2030 and you haven't made significant progress, you are not getting to net zero by 2050 because it's too hard to do given the glide paths.
Peter, you think there's any chance of that, though? Because Manchin has already come out and said, OK, I said yes to this $1.9 trillion COVID bill, but I'm not doing it again for an infrastructure bill. He said flat out, no.
Yeah, we're going to have to see how this all plays out, because I think on the one hand, I understand the concern that many people may have about another deficit finance bill. On the other hand, one of the most frequent experiences I had as the director of the Congressional Budget Office would be to go up to a senator's office who wanted to offset the deficit effects with my big binder full of possible tax increases and spending cuts, walk through the list and realize that they were in favor of deficit offsets in theory. But when you looked at the details, every single thing is very, very, very hard to do. So I don't think we've reached the moment where the true trade-offs have become clear yet.
Yeah, but my point is you may not be dealing with a how do we pay for this? Do we do offsets or do we do deficit spending? You may be faced with a do we do this or do we not do this if you can't get 50 Democrats to agree on it.
Again, I think you will get 50 Democrats in favor of infrastructure and climate because there's a widespread recognition that we need to do something. You're right that there's a debate over the size, but I think the key part of that is going to be how big is the offset piece and how big is the deficit finance piece. But all of this, Becky, I think you're absolutely right. All of this is still kind of in the early innings. I predict that this is going to be harder to do than many people currently suggest. And one reason is the one that you're highlighting, which is that the swing votes in the Senate are basically in a much different place than the swing votes in the House. And that makes it quite complicated. Right. But it's also very early, and people, we don't really know where the exact cutoff points or the pressure points are yet, because we're not yet in the middle of that debate. That's coming, and it's going to be messier than most people think.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.